Hello, class. I am here. I had 15 minutes in between class, and it just wasn't enough to get ready. So we might change the schedule for the critical thinking class, but I do like getting out of here at 3:15. It's kind of nice for me. So we'll see. What we might change it to 15 minutes late. Then I'll get out of here at 3:30. Not so bad. Good morning, critical thinkers. How are you? This is Dr. Annette Feravich, the teacher in the classroom. All right, let's keep moving. Where are we? Or let's start moving. How about we not keep moving? How about we start moving? Okay. This is what we're talking about today. So we've got, I promised you I would go into more detail about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but also talking to you about self-esteem, right? And also I want to get your minds a little bit ready for the idea that it's not self-esteem that we really need to work on. It is self-worth. And these two distinctions are really important because, excuse me, I'm sure that you know that we've had many people, when they talk about self-esteem and making sure that they're increasing people's self-esteem, they get very agitated about that, as if somebody's self-esteem is more important than, truth, is more important than a lesson that they need to learn, that self-esteem is more important than correction. Self-esteem is more important than, again, the biggest thing is truth, right? The biggest thing there is that self-esteem, I can't hear the truth. I'm not talking about anybody's truth, right? I'm not talking about anybody's truth. I'm talking about the truth. And the truth is that somebody's behavior may be worthy of a reprimand. That might be true, right? Somebody's behavior might be worthy of correction, punishment, conviction, right? We do that in our court of law. Why? Because some people's behavior is worthy of correction, conviction, right? And punishment as well, right? Penalties as well. If this weren't true, that some people deserve that, there would be no justice. And I would, just think about an injustice, maybe not think about a big injustice that you couldn't have happen to you. That's what we have when we have people who are, basically lawless, not being reprimanded, not being corrected, not being punished, right? Not being convicted for those things that they do wrong. And this is in the name of what? It has been in the name of what? At younger ages, it's been the name of preserving your self-esteem. Well, we've learned it doesn't. That if you don't have somebody master the truth in their lives, no matter what that truth is, right? The truth isn't usually so horrible, right? If somebody's looking for correction, they're not an evil person, right? So most of the time when we're talking about looking for correction, we're not talking about destroying the person in the correction. We're talking about really building a much finer individual. Correction, punishment, conviction, refinement. I call it refinement. In my philosophical class, I call it, in spiritual class, I call it spiritual class. I call it refinement. That's refining and fire is what it is. Okay. And you can critically think about that if you want. Do you have to be refined in fire? Join my spiritual class and you can talk about it or think about it. Anyway, we're not to the talking stage quite yet in my classes. I hope soon. All right. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I kept up the other slides here because I wanted us to remember what we're talking about as well, and as a little reminder. So when we are talking about things, all these things about feelings, all the things about feelings, And this is one of the reasons why, as psychologists, we have ignored it, right? Or as scientists, we've ignored feelings, is because why? Because feelings are subjective. And if you were in your right mind, you wouldn't feel that way, maybe, right? So, and what I'm saying by that is if feelings are subjective, that is your own opinion and not based on fact, somebody might say, you have no reason to feel that way. Look at the facts. Look at the facts. And remember, that's what we were talking about traditional measures of happiness. How do you feel that way? Look at the facts. You can't feel that way. Look at the facts. You have a family. You didn't come from a divorced home. That would be a big one, right? Because that's few and far between. You have a job. You have nothing to complain about. That is somebody who's looking at, you live in a nice city, you have garbage pickup, right? You're employed, you're not sick. Of course you're happy. And of course you have high self-esteem. Why wouldn't you? Because self-esteem is, I can't do my finger up there, subjective. Self-esteem is, let's do it this way, subjective. Self-esteem is subjective. That's the reason why. You can't tell me based on the facts how I'm supposed to feel. There are people who lose people who don't feel anything. Based on the facts, you don't know based on the facts, you lost somebody important to you. This is how you should feel. Maybe not. Maybe not. That's what's so interesting about feelings and studying feelings. They are subjective, and then they become very individual, don't they? They become very individualized. It's one of the reasons why we really need to stop thinking that any kind of medical treatment has just one fit for all, right? Because so many of these things really can be subjective. Even things like pain can be subjective, right? Some people feel the loss of somebody so much so that it makes them physically ill, and really physically ill, not just like, oh, I have a stomach ache, but literally can just stir up their gut so much so that they end up getting diseases, right? And that is really, so how can that be? If how is pain not objective? Take a measure. If I poke a pin in my finger, it should feel the same for everybody, shouldn't it? It's the same pin. If I'm going to the same depth, why wouldn't it feel the same for everybody? Well, pain is a feeling, and feelings are subjective. They are. Even something like feeling the pain of being pricked with a pin, even that is subjective. We have babies or young children who cry when they get a shot, and other people who I saw pictures of just, no big deal, right? Some of that has everything to do with what's in somebody's mind, right? So, feelings are subjective. And even though you think somebody has everything, they may not be happy. And even though you think that somebody has everything going for them, they may not have high self-esteem, right? Okay, so let's dig into that. In our clinical, I thought I'd, make this title announcement so it sounds like you're reminded of my brand. In the critical thinking classroom. Dun, dun, dun. Okay. We've done all of that. I've got mastering the task up there still, so you can remember that is our goal, to master any task, right? Here we talked about the health consequences of not being happy, right? We had the cheerful nuns or non-cheerful nuns. And then here we just had the smiling faces is what we had, right? And that told us about their marriages. It helped tell us about their satisfaction with life. It helped tell us about how emotionally stable they were later on in their life, right? So these were wonderful things to find out about the relationship between our feelings, which are subjective, and our health. And this one talked about the differences between hedonic happiness and eudaimonic happiness. Eudaimonic happiness is, I love the way Aristotle defined it. It is being true to yourself. So eudaimonic happiness we can define using Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What? All right, I don't have the right ones up here, or I don't have all of them up here. I'll let you look at this. Give me a sec. All right, there we go. Sorry about that. I think I may have just not uploaded all the slides I was supposed to upload, is what ended up happening. And how'd that one get in there since I deleted that? All right, so here we are with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so here's where we were defining more clearly. We can see that there was a difference in our immunity between individuals who were just happy, right? And that could be either hedonic happiness or eudaimonic happiness. When we measured them on subjective scales like our satisfaction with life scale that we have here, right? When we measured them on a subjective scale like the satisfaction with life scale, a subjective scale is just an opinion scale, right? So, and this is called, in fact, our measure of happiness in psychology actually is called subjective well-being. That's happiness. That those two words are synonymous. They mean the same thing in psychology, which seems ridiculous, doesn't it? But not really. In some ways it's not, because it really clearly tells us what happiness is. It's subjective. It's subjective. It's my own opinion, but it leads to me feeling good, right? Well-being. All right. So it's subjective. You could call it subjective happiness, but happiness by definition is subjective. Well-being isn't. Well-being is our health. So subjective well-being, subjective health, happiness. It's a stretch. But by definition, our definition of happiness is subjective. By definition, by title, subjective well-being. Okay, so when we measured all individuals, whether or not they tended to be hedonic leaning, which is leaning towards what? Pleasures of the senses, right? The very first one, the top one of the three elements to authentic happiness. When individuals leaned more towards hedonic pleasures, those individuals fulfilled the very first need for authentic happiness, the need for pleasure. So that's how they measured individuals, right? They asked them how important things of pleasure were, and also how important it was for them to be engaged, and also how important it was for them to have meaning and purpose in their lives. And then they divided those individuals to those individuals that only cared about pleasure or cared significantly more about pleasure than the other things, and those who cared about engagement and meaning and purpose more so than the other things, pleasure needs. All right? So they divided those individuals into groups based on their answers to those surveys. Based on their answers, some were more hedonic, and based on their answers, some were more eudaimonic. They asked them how happy they were, and there was no significant difference in their levels of happiness when they were, measured by, for example, satisfaction with life scale, for example, okay? They had other scales that they were measured by, if you recall, that we talked about. Doesn't even matter. I'm saying that the level of happiness between individuals who subjectively said how happy they were, there was no significant difference between hedonic and eudaimonic individuals. So they claim to be just as happy. Both of those groups claim to be similar in levels of happiness. However, they were not similar in their immune system. And that was the big deal, that those people who were more engaged and who were driven by meaning and purpose had a resilience that we did not find in individuals who were more hedonic, leaning in their pleasures, in their happiness. Okay? All right. So how does this work then? How does this work when we have needs to be happy that are related to pleasure, and we have needs to be happy that are related to something bigger, something more, getting more out of ourselves, true to yourself, true to yourself? What does that mean to you? That would be a really good idea for you to write that down. It doesn't mean that these ideas are inflexible, right? It doesn't mean that they can't change over time. But it's not a bad idea to get an idea, to have some concept of what it means to have meaning and purpose. What does that mean to you? No, what I said was to be true to yourself, right? What does that mean to you to be true to yourself? And even writing other things down about how can I become more engaged? Because I know what Dr. Feravich is telling me, and that is that I will be healthier, that I will be truer to myself. So having an idea of what engages you, having an idea of what is meaningful and gives you purpose in life, those are the things that define who you truly are. I want to be engaged in reading. I don't want to be engaged in downhill skiing. I want to be engaged in basketball. I don't want to be engaged in television, right? Who are you when you are true to yourself? The best way to examine that would be to examine what are you doing to get yourself more engaged in life, right? Authentic happiness number 2. Where do you get meaning in life? Where do you have purpose in life? Authentic happiness, target number 3 or element number 3, right? Okay. So write those things down. It really helps make those ideas in your brain more solid. We call it solidifying. It solidifies the ideas in your head. It makes your ideas more solid. Don't forget, we don't want these ideas to be inflexible. We want them to be good, solid, well thought ideas, but they are not supposed to be inflexible. Okay? All right. Now we've got this hedonic versus eudaimonic happiness here, right? So, and then on the left-hand side, we see the divisions between the two. And then on the right-hand side, we see where each one of those levels is divided up into basic needs, psychological needs, and self-fulfilling needs. At the bottom there, we have the most basic needs. And I've talked about this as being dynamic. And what dynamic means is that it changes over time. But the thing about this is that it's really not so dynamic, not nearly as dynamic as we think that it might be. I don't think, and this is actually what I'm saying here is I am, it's a theory. I'm not saying that I have the answer or that this is actually a right answer, but I do have a theory that this is not nearly as dynamic as we once thought it was. And what I'm trying to find here right now, if you're wondering what I'm doing, is I am looking for the picture that I have, which I'm going to get, that demonstrates this relationship as being dynamic. So let me, whenever I do this, it distracts me so I can't do anything else. Dynamic Maslow. Oh, save current slide only, thank goodness. Okay. Let me get that up here for you. Then you'll know what I'm talking about. This shows you, and this actually is Maslow's hierarchy of needs for other cultures. Because other cultures have a tendency to focus on different things than we do here in the United States. So if we were to basically be as healthy as we could be, we would end up following the hierarchy of needs exactly as it looks right there. That's what we would end up doing. If we were healthy, we would follow the hierarchy of needs as we matured, exactly as it is envisioned right there. We would have our parents fulfill our basic needs, our physiological needs, right? And once those are fulfilled, what ends up happening is that there is a change in dynamics. So it is dynamic, especially at the beginning, as you acquire these needs, all right? So why is the pyramid shaped the way that it is? Is it because the physical needs are the greatest needs? They are at first. And if we don't have those needs fulfilled, we cannot move on to higher order needs. And this is what makes Maslow's hierarchy of needs dynamic. That is what happens. We have a great need to have our physical needs fulfilled. As an infant, we have to depend on somebody else, and it becomes our greatest need. But once those are fulfilled and we no longer have to put effort or resources towards them, that need shrinks. So there it's got the largest base of any of those needs there. But as that need is fulfilled, that shrinks. And what we end up having then is something that looks more like what we have here, which is, you can see there the pyramid or the diamond shaped now that's on the right. See, and for both of those, what am I talking about? For both of those, look at how our physical needs have shrunk, right? They've shrunk, they've shrunken, they shrank, they shrank. They shrank significantly, right? They are the smallest need in both of those cases there. So as we fulfill the need, what ends up happening is, since there are less resources, less of a focus on that need, we end up reducing the number of resources we're dedicating to that need, and And that's what makes it shrink. What those levels, the size of those levels are representing is the amount of resources we are dedicating to fulfill that need. Do I have to have those physical needs fulfilled before I can fulfill any other need? I do. So those are still some of the greatest needs. My physical needs to eat, it occurs every single day. My physical need to sleep occurs every single night, right? But my resources are no longer dedicated to it. It's easy peasy for me to have my basic needs. Thank you, Jesus, right? It's easy peasy for me to have my basic needs fulfilled. And so I don't have to spend the resources on those needs like I did when I was an infant. I couldn't get those needs met, but I spent a lot of resources on getting them right, because all my resources were on, if I wasn't satisfied, what did I do? I cried. All my resources were spent on getting those needs as an infant. Okay, so we see how this hierarchy of need becomes dynamic, right? In that picture there at the bottom, where we've got the inverted pyramid, the upside down pyramid, right, where we have that actually represents Eastern culture. So people really from the East, from Asia, they have a tendency in there, because they have a tendency to be far more spiritual than we are here, to have a belief in something, very easily believing in something that is outside of their senses. Here in Western world, we are focused on science, and being focused on science, which is a good thing, right? But being focused on science means that we really put a lot of our belief in our senses, and not a lot of belief at all in anything outside of our senses. Eastern culture for millennia have believed in a spirit world that has, a strong foundation. This belief has been around for 5,000 years, at least. And so they have a strong foundation and an easy time believing that there are powers well beyond the human being, the individual, the power of the group, for example. They give credence to what is that? What is that when we get a group of people together? We're going to talk about that in our philosophical classroom when we talk about group think today. What is that moves the group in a different way than the individual? Why aren't we measuring that, right? It can't be seen. It can't be physically measured, right, with our senses, but there's a movement there there's an energy that literally moves people in a direction. What is that? Eastern cultures have taken that for granted. They don't have to question it. They've always believed it. They know it's truth. It is truth to them, right? And it's true. And it's true, by the way. It's just not truth to everybody. Okay? But it's true. Whether it's not truth to a person or not doesn't make it true or untrue, right? Okay. So in that inverted pyramid there, what does Eastern culture focus on and put their resources towards? That's the reason why it's the inverted pyramid. Where are they putting their resources? They're putting their resources at the top of that pyramid in self-esteem needs, and more importantly, self-actualization needs, right? That's what they're doing. How about the diamond over there that I have? The diamond over there. That actually represents Western culture. Now, again, people are different. So just because I say it represents Western culture doesn't mean that it represents everybody in Western cultures. And when we're talking about Western culture, so that you know, what does that mean? It really means the culture that is founded in Aristotle and Plato's philosophies. Okay? So Greek philosophy. What is Western thought? Western thought has been passed down from Greek philosophers. And in the sweep, right, of collecting this knowledge and coming down through the ages, Christianity is then swept up in that thought as well. All right. Christianity is swept up in Western thought. So you can think of Western thought as being Christian, but the roots of Western thought are in Greek philosophy, Socrates, Aristotle, and Plato. Okay? So when we're talking about that, Western ideas and Western thoughts, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we focus and think about the truth of this, right? Think about the truth of this. We focus where? On our self-esteem needs and being loved. And being loved. So the biggest resources, we put our biggest resources in love. Feelings of belonging. We want to belong. And this is really important because what it ends up doing is it ends up focusing our attention on the other. The other. If I need to belong, then my attention belong to what? Belong to what? Belong to me? No, I belong to me, right? What do I have a need to belong to and feel love? A group, a group. And here's where we become dependent on all things outside of ourselves. And this is very different in Western and Eastern culture. Eastern culture works on the inside. It's an inside job. Getting to self-actualization is all an inside job, and Eastern culture knows it. Western culture says, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? Let me change you. Let me change you because I don't feel good. I don't feel the love. Woke you. Let me change you. Talk differently. Say these words. Address me this way. That's Western culture. We think our love is an outside job. Eastern cultures, I'm sorry, they've got it right. It's an inside job. And that's why many people in Western culture do not mature past their selfish, self-indulgent needs. Now, you may not like me saying that. We can see it's true. We can see this is true with the alt-right. All they are is self-indulgent. They want to change everybody and point the finger at what everybody else is doing wrong because they are self-indulgent. Indulge me. You out there, indulge me. Feed me what I want you to feed me. And we've been talking about this in our philosophical class as we have been talking about Fromm's on disobedience, on disobedience. And what is this? Here, I want to do it that way, right? And what is this disobedience? Who are we disobeying? That doesn't sound like it's a good word. I've mentioned this before to us. That doesn't sound like a good word, being disobedient. Who are we disobeying? We are disobeying our need to have the approval of the group. We are disobeying our need to feel like love is an outside job and dependent on the group, right? This is saying disobey that drive to be part of the group and obey the drive inside of you. That is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, we need to have that drive inside of us be really constructive, driven by the right things. Because we clearly see that alt-right movement has a drive inside of themselves, but that drive really is dependent on getting everybody to think like they do, right? Changing everybody else. That's not an inside job. Where do they get their love from? Which is that second layer there, right? Where do they get that love? Or I'm sorry, the third layer there. So it's yellow on Maslow's and it's green on the charts that I did there. I made those to show the dynamics of this. Okay, so get back to the point. The point there that I was trying to make is that I don't think once you've hit the pinnacle, once you've gotten the inverted triangle that we have there, that's really what our goal is. We start with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but our goal there is the inverted triangle where we are putting our resources on that top layer. Now, what we've seen here is a real movement, I have said, and this is something we can critically think about. This is a critical thinking class, right? I have said that we've seen a movement to see what happens when we push people from that top level and force them to worry about lower levels. And what if I forced you to worry about where your food was coming from and where your sleep was coming from? And the next one up there is stress. So making it's basically free from fear, so I don't have stress. So what if I pushed you down back down into those levels? Let's say that that's what government has been. I don't want to say government. I want to say because I don't think it's. I think that our government in general helps us, right? But individuals certainly don't. I mean, we were talking about in our Bookless classroom, we're talking about American history, and we talked about how Congress, so we were reading our Valley Forge here, right? So what happened in Valley Forge, and this is from Cornerstones of Freedom, this series over here, which is so, I think I'm supposed to go this way. Nope, that way, which is a really unbelievable series over here. So, so talking about what happened here in Valley Forge, this is what I want to say. The government, the Congress people didn't care about what was happening to Washington. George Washington, our first president, was a soldier, and Congress didn't care what was happening. It just made no sense, because the destruction is going to end up being in the fact that we couldn't settle the United States. And very often we see no difference here. How could Congress have turned such a blind eye to their soldiers who were fighting for this country? We see Congress turning a blind eye to the needs of the people in favor of, for very specifically, the medical industry. Very specifically, the money makers right now is the medical industry. Making people sick and then curing them. Whoo, cha-ching, right? We all know it. They're trying. They don't care that we know it. They don't care because they continue to go about their business, right? We all know that. But I'm trying to do something about it. Are you? Are you trying to be constructively doing something about it? Or are you just targeting all the people outside of yourself that don't believe the way that you do? Because you don't understand. You're ignorant of the fact that this is an inside job. You want to get what you want. It's an inside job. It's not about forcing other people to think like you do, because you live in fear. All those alt-right people, those are very characteristic of people who are hanging out at those bottom two levels. All their resources are going towards getting more resources. Bottom level. Why? Because the next level up, they're so afraid. They're so afraid. And that's what they do. And by the way, when we hang out at those bottom levels, we see the consequences. And the consequences are that those people act like animals. They have to act like animals because they are only spending time, they are only securing their very basic needs. That's very animalistic, right? Me hunting for food always, me always defensive because I'm afraid that I'm going to be attacked. That's animalistic behaviors. And we also see it, critical thinking high school class, we also see it in their sexuality as well. So acting like animals in their sexuality. People don't act like animals in their sexuality when they are at the top of that pyramid. They don't act like animals in their sexuality when they're self-actualized. Why? Because I'm not at my best. I'm at my very, very worst. Does that mean that we can't be satisfied in the bedroom? Of course we can be satisfied in the bedroom. Now we're getting a little bit past high school. A little bit. Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Anyway. So no, And now we're going to talk spiritually for a minute, get into our spiritual classroom for a minute. Scripturally speaking, God says, what happens between two consenting adults in their bedroom is okay. It's okay. Now we know if it's not consenting. Consensual sex in the bedroom doesn't mean I pretend like it's consensual. It has to be truthfully consensual. But if it's consensual in the bedroom and you're both enjoying it and doing it, that's okay. That's okay. So that's what we're talking about, because by the time you've got up that ladder all the way to the top of that pyramid, you've experienced love. And it's not and it's no longer a selfish love. So you couldn't be making love in all kinds of selfish ways. Why? Because you've reached the pinnacle of your needs. It's your needs. I don't need to act like an animal when I have my higher order needs fulfilled. Okay? I don't have to act like an animal. And that's how we know who is focused on their lower order needs. They are satisfying their hedonic pleasures. The word hedonic says I focus on physical needs. I'm a hedonist, right? That is pleasure of the senses. And in doing so, that brings about the same levels of fulfillment as an animal looks for, right? But we aren't animals, not in that same way, right? We aren't the same kind of animals. We are thinking and choosing and moral individuals. Isn't that the difference, right? My Lucy doesn't know what is moral and immoral, but look at what she does. She acts like a moral dog, a moral being more than I do, right? There isn't a question of good and bad for Lucy. She acts like Lucy, and that is always good, right? So I guess, what am I saying? Animals can be self-actualized? Is that what I'm saying? No, but Lucy is. That's what I'm saying. No. Okay, so when we are self-actualized, what we are, and again, when I started separating humans from other animals, what? It is our ability to think and choose. And those choices are either going to be constructive or destructive. They are either moral choices, whether or not you want to put that frame on it, or they are immoral choices. They are constructive, and those are moral choices, or they are destroying, and those are immoral choices, period. If you are destroying a person, an individual, if you are destroying a group, if you're destroying our democracy, if you're destroying people in the government, you are immoral. You are acting immoral. And from our spiritual connection classroom, we already know you're going to lose the battle. Why don't you know that? You think you are acting in moral ways, but you know what he said? He said, I don't even know you. What do you mean you don't know me? Didn't I do all of these things in your name? No, you did them in your name. You did them in your name because that's what you wanted. That's not love. If you are destructive, you are acting in immoral ways. And if you are floating there in that middle bar looking for love, in all the wrong places. Why? Because I'm looking for it outside of myself, and when I can't find it, I force other people to succumb to my demands for love. That's why we have so many angry men. That's all they're doing, is demanding love from women as opposed to loving them, being a good man and loving them, right? Okay, so take a good look at that. I don't need to go into any more detail. what I needed to do for you is give you the background and allow you to think a little bit more clearly about the differences between hedonic and eudaimonic happiness, and then to see those levels and determine or discover how those levels really do fulfill those greater, higher order needs, right? Needs for engagement, the need for meaning, and the need for purpose. How is it that those can really be fulfilling and giving me joy? Those are the things that you want to take away and begin to sort of do your little rabbit holes of discovery, right? Okay. Now, what I said I was going to do was I was going to begin to talk to you about self-esteem. And this is how I'm going to talk to you about it. I'm going to talk to you about it as we discuss and discover what are the two largest epidemics in the United States. Now, this is research that was done by a psychologist who is also a social and clinical psychologist. I am not a clinical psychologist, but I am a social psychologist. So similar, done in the similar area that I'm in psychology, in a similar area that I'm in as well. And so he started doing this research as an outcome of literally, let me get over here. As an outcome literally of school shootings, and more specifically, the school shooting in Columbine in the late 1990s. I don't want to get the year wrong, but late 1990s. So the real first school shooting, mass shooting that we saw that came from, and here was the issue. So we have a society that blames most of our crime on minority, and in particular, one specific group, Black minorities, right? And what we've known in psychology and studying this is that it's very easy for us to recognize, because these are external and visible crimes. So it's very easy for us to identify. We called it blue collar crime is what we did. But basically, if you want to have a better picture of what that means, it means what kind of crimes were Black people committing? Well, they were committing more external crimes that had to do with, that I could visually see, that I knew, right? Do not steal, do not kill, right? Those were the biggies right there that we were seeing. And we could visually see, right? But what about the same kinds of things that we couldn't visually see that we called white collar crime? So, for example, they're experimenting with COVID virus. We know they've been experimenting, and they continue to experiment with COVID virus as these viruses have been released into the general population, and other viruses, as was just reported. And UK News, I think it was. Could have been the Times, I'm not sure. Okay. So many viruses have been accidentally released in here in the United States, right? So who is taking responsibility for that, right? What ends up happening then when this ends up getting released in the whole society then? Who ends up being responsible for doing something about this? Okay, so we've got these, so Seligman wants to take a look at, all right, that's what I was saying. As you can see, I lost that thought right there. White collar crime. How many people lost their lives, right? We had over 1 million people, almost 2 million people, I think it was, last count, lose their lives here in the United States due to that virus. And we all know that virus was concocted in a lab. It was irresponsible people that allowed that virus to go. So and who ends up being responsible in the end for it? Well, so far, nobody. And all it is a bunch of finger pointing is what it is. So blue collar crime, typically, well, what did we do? We said blue collar crime was typically we could just say black crime is what it was, because that's who we were incarcerating, that's who we were villainizing, and that's who we could visually see break our rules. It's much more difficult. We have been spending how many years now on trying to figure this out, even though we knew a long time ago Wuhan virus came from Wuhan, China. How about that? The Wuhan virus, maybe it came from Wuhan, China labs. Maybe it did, right? He said that a long time ago. And we all knew it was true. How long did it take us? Who has the consequences? Who's suffering consequences because of that? It's a mystery, isn't it? Because we don't see a direct line between the crime and the person. So now we're studying this crime, and we're seeing that the school shooting there in Columbine is happening with what you would consider somebody in the class level of committing white collar crimes, right? Here they are committing a down and dirty, very savage crime. And it's being committed by popular kids in high school who live in $400,000 and $500,000 homes and in an exclusive neighborhood by white, affluent, very rich, popular kids. How is this happening? And that's what Martin Seligman wanted to find out. How could this be happening in our affluent, rich, white neighborhoods? We expect it in the crime-ridden black neighborhoods. How is this happening? And then time and time and time and time and time and time again, these crimes aren't being committed by black individuals. They're being committed by those who are from rich, elite, but right-winged thinking individuals. And Seligman wanted to know how that's happening. Okay, we will come back here on, I think I'm going to be back here on Wednesday. I've got an appointment on Tuesday, and I don't think I'm going to be able to make it. I might be able to make the afternoons. I'm not quite sure if I'm going to be able to make the afternoon classes or not. So I will let you know, but you won't know until Tuesday, because I won't know until Tuesday either. So I will see you here on Wednesday for sure. Okay? All right. And we will pick up where we left off. And here we're going to finish talking about self-esteem. This is Dr. Annette Feravich. I am the teacher, and this is the classroom. Dun, dun, dun. Thanks for joining me.